The alien world of Grash Prime pulsed with a dark energy, its twin moons casting an eerie silver glow over jagged mountains and endless plains of ash. The air, thick with the scent of decay and sulfur, carried the low hum of drums, a signal that the tribe had gathered. Tonight was a night of sacrifice. The Grash were a brutal, efficient race, their lives ruled by an unyielding hierarchy and a fierce devotion to the Karath, a monstrous wolf-like creature they revered as both god and executioner. The beast was the embodiment of their strength and savagery, and feeding its insatiable hunger was the cornerstone of their survival. To the Grash, the Karath's wrath was as tangible as the blood-stained ground on which they stood. And tonight, a new offering was to be made. In a cage made of blackened bone, a human child sat huddled in a corner, her knees drawn to her chest. Mia, no older than 7, stared through the gaps in her prison, her wide, tear-filled eyes reflecting the flicker of firelight from the torches surrounding her. Her captors had said nothing to her since the raid, but she needed no words to understand her fate. She had seen the destruction left in their wake, the way their claws tore through her settlement like paper. The Grash warriors were massive, their scaled bodies gleaming under the moonlight, their movements precise and predatory. She had watched helplessly as her parents fell before them, their screams echoing even now in her mind. The largest of the Grash, a creature whose armor seemed fused to his body, approached her cage. His name was Korathok, the tribe's war chief and the one who had claimed her as the sacrifice. His voice, guttural and sharp, barked commands to the others as they began preparations. Mia flinched as the cage lurched upward, carried by 2 smaller warriors toward the ceremonial pit. The pit itself was a gaping maw in the earth, surrounded by jagged obsidian stones. The air above it shimmered with heat, though no fire burned. Mia's cage was set at the edge, and the warriors stepped back, leaving her alone as the chanting began. The sound was a guttural harmony, reverberating in her chest and making her feel smaller than she already was. She could barely see over the edge of the pit, but she didn't have to look to know what awaited her below. She had heard the tales whispered by those who had survived Grash raids, of the beast that devoured flesh and shattered bones with ease. Korathok stepped forward, raising a clawed hand to silence the chants. He turned to the pit, his voice booming as he spoke in his native tongue. Though Mia couldn't understand the words, their meaning was clear. This was a prayer to their god, an offering made in blood to ensure the tribe's prosperity. As the chant reached its crescendo, Korathok motioned to the cage. 2 warriors moved forward, their claws slicing through the bone bars with ease. They yanked Mia to her feet, their grip cold and unyielding, and carried her to the edge. She fought, kicking and screaming, but her struggles were like the flailing of a moth in a spider's web. With a single calculated motion, they dropped her into the pit. Mia landed hard on the rocky ground, her breath knocked from her lungs. She coughed, tears blurring her vision as she struggled to her feet. The chanting above ceased, and a heavy silence fell. From the shadows of the pit, something moved. The Karath emerged with a slow, deliberate grace, its bioluminescent eyes glowing in otherworldly blue. Its massive frame was covered in dark fur that shimmered like oil, its claws clicking against the stone as it advanced. The beast's head was low, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air. Mia stood frozen, her legs refusing to obey her desperate desire to run. The Karath's growl rumbled through the pit, a sound that shook the very ground beneath her feet. Above, the Grash watched with anticipation, their collective breaths held. This was the moment they lived for, the validation of their power through the sacrifice of another. Yet as the Karath loomed closer to the trembling child, something unexpected happened. The beast stopped, its massive head tilted to one side, those glowing eyes narrowing as it studied her. Mia's heart thundered in her chest, her breath shallow and quick. She didn't dare move, but she couldn't look away from the creature's gaze. There was intelligence in those eyes, something far more complex than raw hunger. Slowly, instinctively, Mia extended a trembling hand. She had no plan, no hope that this gesture could change her fate, but the Karath didn't move to strike. Instead, it lowered its head, allowing her fingers to graze the coarse fur along its snout. The beast's growl faded, replaced by a sound that almost resembled a purr. Above, the grash erupted into chaos. This was no mere hesitation. This was defiance. The Karath, their god, had rejected the sacrifice. Korathok roared, demanding silence, his claws flexing as he glared into the pit. He barked orders to the warriors, though some hesitated, their fear of the beast outweighing their loyalty to their leader. Mia remained still, her hand still resting on the Karatha's snout. She could feel its breath, warm and steady, as it leaned closer. For the first time since her capture, she felt something other than fear. It wasn't safety, not yet, but it was a spark of hope, fragile and fleeting. The Karatha's gaze met hers again, and in that moment, an unspoken bond was forged. The beast stepped back, positioning itself between Mia and the grash above. It let out a deafening roar, one that echoed far beyond the pit, silencing the tribe's chaos. Mia flinched at the sound, but she didn't retreat. Somehow, she knew the Karath wasn't threatening her. It was protecting her. The grash stared down into the pit, their expressions a mixture of confusion, anger, and fear. Korathok's growl rumbled deep in his chest as he turned to his warriors, barking commands once more. Whatever was happening, it was not the outcome they had anticipated, and the implications rippled through them like a shockwave. In the pit, Mia stood beside the Karath, her small frame dwarfed by the massive beast. She didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain. Her fate was no longer entirely in the hands of the grash. For now, she had an ally, and in a world as unforgiving as this, that meant everything. The Karath stood as an immovable barrier between Mia and the circling grash warriors, its massive frame illuminated by the faint glow of its bioluminescent eyes. The chants from above had devolved into angry shouts, and the metallic scrape of weapons being drawn echoed ominously through the pit. Mia didn't understand their words, but she could sense their meaning. The tribe saw her survival as a transgression, a challenge to their ritualistic order. Yet the Karath had made its choice. It wasn't going to kill her. Mia's small hands clenched into fists, her knuckles pale against the dark backdrop of the pit. Despite her fear, a strange clarity settled over her mind. The Karatha's protection wasn't out of loyalty. It couldn't be. This creature wasn't human. It didn't think or feel the way she did. But its actions defied the primal savagery the grash had so confidently paraded. Something deeper churned within the beast. Something she wasn't sure even it understood. Above them, Korathok's voice bellowed over the chaos, silencing the dissent. The war chief's eyes burned as they bore down on the scene below, his claws twitching with suppressed fury. Mia flinched as the sound of ropes uncoiling reached her ears. Korathok raised a clawed hand, and two warriors approached the edge of the pit, their weapons gleaming in the moonlight. The Karatha's ears flattened, a low snarl rising from its chest. It turned its glowing eyes upward, challenging the grash with a roar that reverberated like thunder. The warriors hesitated, stepping back as though the sound alone might strike them down. For all their confidence in their god-beast, none dared to test its wrath when it defied them. Mia took a deep breath, trying to steady her trembling body. She could feel the Karatha's presence beside her, its sheer size and power offering a strange comfort. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to summon her father's voice. He taught her so much about animals, how they saw the world through instinct and emotion. She remembered his hands, rough but gentle, guiding hers as they worked to calm an injured stray dog back home. "They don't speak your language," he had said, "but they'll understand you if you listen first." She opened her eyes. The Karatha's snarl softened as it glanced down at her, its glowing gaze unreadable. Carefully, Mia crouched, mimicking the submissive posture her father had shown her so long ago. The Karatha's head tilted, its sharp ears twitching as it watched her intently. Slowly, she extended her hand again, her palm facing upward in a gesture of trust. The beast hesitated, its nostrils flaring, before it lowered its massive head once more. Its nose brushed her hand, and she felt a strange warmth radiating from its fur. Above them, Korathok barked another order, his voice sharp and decisive. Mia looked up to see the warriors beginning to spread out, their weapons ready. They weren't going to risk a direct attack, but they wouldn't simply let her live either. The Korath growled, stepping closer to her, its body tense and poised to strike if necessary. Mia's heart pounded as she realized the delicate balance they were trapped in. The beast wouldn't abandon her, but how long could it hold off an entire tribe? Her mind raced, searching for something, anything that could shift the odds. She looked at the Korath, studying its movements, its reactions. There was something almost familiar in the way it responded to the threat, the way it placed itself between her and the Grash. It wasn't just instinct. It was deliberate, calculated. This wasn't an animal acting purely on hunger or fear. There was intelligence in those glowing eyes, and she had to trust it. A memory surfaced, unbidden and sharp. She had been 6, sitting in the garden with her father, watching ants build a colony. She had marveled at their precision, the way they communicated without words. Even the smallest creatures have a system, her father had told her. They work together because they understand their purpose. And sometimes, when you're kind enough or clever enough, you can become part of that system. The Korath's muscles coiled as another warrior edged closer, his spear glinting ominously. Mia acted on instinct, stepping forward to place her hand firmly on the beast's side. It froze, its snarl cutting off abruptly as it glanced back at her. She didn't know if it would understand, but she couldn't just wait to be slaughtered. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling but steady. "Please don't let them win." The Korath's gaze lingered on her for a moment, and then it turned back to the warriors above. Its lips curled back, revealing rows of jagged teeth, but it didn't lunge. Instead, it released a guttural roar that made the ground tremble beneath them. The Grash hesitated again, their resolve faltering. Mia could see it in their eyes, the doubt creeping into their rigid order. The Korath wasn't obeying their expectations, and it terrified them. Korathok snarled, his fury barely contained. He barked a final command, and one of the warriors stepped forward, his weapon aimed at Mia rather than the beast. Time seemed to slow as the spear arced toward her, its lethal point gleaming in the dim light. Before she could react, the Korath moved. The beast's jaws snapped shut around the spear mid-flight, shattering it like brittle wood. The warrior stumbled back, his eyes wide with fear as the Korath advanced, its growl deep and resonant. It didn't strike, but the message was clear. No harm would come to the girl. Not while it stood. Mia felt her legs threaten to give way beneath her, but she forced herself to stay upright. She couldn't let the Grash see her weakness. She glanced at the Korath, her mind racing. This wasn't just about survival anymore. The beast had chosen her for reasons she didn't understand, and the Grash's faith in their rituals was crumbling before their eyes. There was an opportunity here, but she had to act carefully. The shouting above grew louder as the Grash began arguing among themselves. Some seemed ready to charge into the pit despite the Korath's defiance, while others hung back, their fear evident. Korathok's commands grew more frantic, his authority slipping with every passing second. Mia tightened her grip on the Korath's fur, her resolve hardening. She didn't know what the future held, but for now, she had the upper hand, however tenuous. The Korath's glowing eyes met hers once more, and she nodded slightly, as if they shared an unspoken understanding. The pit, once a place of death, had become a battlefield of wills. And as Mia stood beside the Korath, her fear began to give way to something stronger, the faint, flickering hope that she might yet survive this night. The tension in the pit was palpable, every breath seeming to weigh heavier than the last. Mia stood firm beside the Korath, her hand still pressed against its coarse fur. She could feel its strength beneath her fingers, a steady, grounding presence in the chaos swirling above. The Grash were arguing now, their guttural voices sharp and fractured. Even from this distance, she could see the cracks forming in their unity, their certainty shaken by the Korath's unprecedented defiance. Korathok's booming voice cut through the clamor like a blade, his fury commanding attention. His authority was absolute, but even he could not ignore the disquiet rippling through his warriors. Some shifted uneasily, their hands tightening on their weapons. Others glanced at the pit with something that almost resembled fear. Mia watched them closely, her mind racing to piece together a plan. She had no allies here but the Karath, and while its loyalty was unspoken, it was undeniable. For reasons she couldn't fully grasp, the beast had chosen to protect her. Now she had to make that protection count. The war chief stepped to the edge of the pit, his burning eyes locked onto the child and the beast below. His clawed hand gestured sharply, and a group of warriors moved to obey, ropes in hand. They intended to subdue the Karath, to reclaim control through sheer force if necessary. Mia's stomach twisted at the thought of what might happen if they succeeded. She could imagine the Karath's ferocity, but even it couldn't withstand an assault from an entire tribe. The Karath growled low, its ears flattening as it watched the approaching warriors. Mia could feel the tension in its body, coiled like a spring ready to snap. Yet it didn't charge. It was waiting, calculating, its gaze flickering between the warriors and the girl it had vowed to protect. Mia's breath caught as an idea began to form, fragile and desperate. If she could survive this far by instinct, then perhaps she could push further by choice. She stepped closer to the beast, her small frame dwarfed by its massive form. "They don't know what you're thinking," she whispered, more to herself than to the Karath. "They're afraid of you. We can use that." The beast glanced down at her, its glowing eyes unreadable but watchful. Mia swallowed hard, turning her attention to the grash above. She spread her arms wide, a tiny figure against the vastness of the pit, and shouted with every ounce of strength she could muster. Her voice cracked, but carried, cutting through the noise with a force that surprised even her. "Stop," she cried, her voice trembling but resolute. "You don't understand. The Karath isn't rejecting your sacrifice. It's choosing something else." The grash froze, their confusion palpable. Korathok's claws curled into fists as he snarled, but even he seemed momentarily caught off guard by her audacity. Mia pressed on, her heart hammering in her chest. "This isn't a failure," she yelled, her voice rising. "It's a sign. The Karath is protecting me because it sees something you don't. If you kill it, or me, you'll destroy whatever it's trying to show you." Her words echoed in the stillness that followed, and for a moment, the only sound was the low growl rumbling from the Karath's throat. Mia could see the doubt spreading through the warriors' ranks, the way they hesitated and exchanged uneasy glances. Their faith in their rituals had been absolute, but the Karath's defiance was a language they didn't know how to interpret. Korathok's voice shattered the fragile quiet, his fury spilling over like a dam breaking. "Lies," he roared, his voice thick with disdain. "The beast is confused. Nothing more. She is a parasite, a weakness in its mind. Kill them both before this blasphemy spreads." The warriors tensed, their hands gripping their weapons more tightly. Mia's pulse quickened, her courage threatening to falter. But the Karath moved before anyone else could. It stepped forward, placing itself fully between Mia and the advancing warriors. Its growl deepened, a sound so primal and resonant that it felt like the very earth beneath them might split apart. The warriors hesitated again, their steps faltering. Mia seized the moment, her mind racing. "They're afraid of you," she whispered again, her hand brushing the Karath's fur. "But we need more than fear. We need to get out of here." She turned her gaze upward, scanning the pit's walls. They were steep but not insurmountable. If the Karath could climb, or leap, there might be a chance. But first they had to clear the path. Her eyes flickered back to the warriors, their hesitation hanging by a thread. She had seconds to act. "Go," she shouted to the Karath, her voice urgent and commanding. "Show them why they should fear you." The beast didn't hesitate. With a snarl that shook the pit, it lunged toward the warriors nearest the edge. It didn't strike to kill, but its sheer size and power sent them scattering like leaves in a storm. Weapons clattered to the ground as the warriors scrambled to avoid its massive claws. Above, Korathok bellowed in rage, his commands drowned out by the chaos. Mia didn't wait to see what would happen next. She grabbed hold of the Karatha's fur as it crouched, its muscles tensing beneath her. Without warning, the beast leapt, its powerful limbs propelling them upward. Mia clung tightly, her breath catching as they soared past the edge of the pit. The world blurred around her, a rush of motion and sound that ended abruptly as they landed with a bone-jarring thud. The Grash roared in protest, but the Karath was already moving, its massive strides carrying them toward the edge of the camp. Mia's heart pounded as she glanced back, seeing the warriors scrambling to pursue. Korthok's voice rang out, his rage a promise of retribution. But the Karath was faster. It wove through the camp with a speed and agility that belied its size, its glowing eyes fixed on the horizon. Mia clung to its back, her fingers gripping tightly as the wind whipped past her face. The sounds of the Grash grew fainter with every step, their voices swallowed by the vast wilderness beyond. When they finally stopped, the world was silent save for the sound of Mia's ragged breathing and the Karatha's steady growl. She slid off its back, her legs trembling as she steadied herself. The beast turned to face her, its glowing eyes meeting hers once more. Mia didn't know what lay ahead. The wilderness was vast and unforgiving, and she was still just a child with no home to return to. But as she looked into the Karatha's eyes, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt since the raid. Hope. The Karath had chosen her, and in its choice, it had shattered the world she'd known. Now together, they would forge a new path, one step at a time.